that's what makes it interesting to some extent is that I'm not a traditional spiritual person.
Mhm.
So for me to actually sort of believe it and understand it and be able to explain it and convey it, to me, adds credibility to it because I'm not a traditional spiritual person. And I'm able to sort of say, hey, even in my situation where I don't have that spiritual bent to me, I see what, I understand this now.
We are so thrilled to have our guest today, Annette Marinaccio. Let me go ahead and read a little bit about her, and then we'll dive right into the interview. Annette is a certified public accountant, an accomplished healthcare executive, and the author of Your Soul Focus. Annette's mother-in-law led Annette on a path after she died to prove to her that there is an afterlife. After understanding that the afterlife is in existence, Annette researched all things metaphysical and learned how intricate and extensive our souls and our journeys are. The information that she has accumulated conveys a clear and deep benefit to others during their times of need, grief, or curiosity. You're so perfect for our show. So nice to meet you and welcome.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
nice.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah.
You
Glad
know
you're
what?
here.
From the outset and on the face of it, an executive, an accountant, you'd be like the last person to show up with this story, right?
I think that's what makes it interesting to some extent is that I'm not a traditional spiritual person.
Mhm.
So for me to actually sort of believe it and understand it and be able to explain it and convey it, to me, adds credibility to it because I'm not a traditional spiritual person. And I'm able to sort of say, hey, even in my situation where I don't have that spiritual bent to me, I see what, I understand this now. So, yeah, I'll sum it up by saying at one point I got the courage up to convey my belief and my understanding of the afterlife to one of the partners of a corporation that I was the CEO of. This was probably about 10 years ago, and I was just understanding about the afterlife, and he was going through something very difficult. And I would typically not convey that kind of information in the workplace, but I was like, I have to help him. And so I did. And at the end of him listening to me, he said, wow, I don't know why he said this, but this is what he said, and you're my CEO, you're a CPA. It's not like you smoke pot or anything. That's what he said.
That's perfect. That's
And I
perfect.
was like, oh, because I think it lent credibility to him
Mhm.
Yes.
hearing it from, not only just a professional, like I'm not a professional, there are professionals that are artistic. I'm CPA. It's like sheer numbers, and
Yeah.
so I think that lent credibility to him. And that actually helped me because by me getting the sort of courage up to
Mhm.
say it to him, I was then able to share it with more people also because I realized it helped him.
Makes
Mhm.
sense. Makes sense.
Well,
So you go ahead,
I
Bernadette.
was just going to say what struck me is with that background is, the part of your intro where you said you started researching. So after this happened, and that's where your skills do come in because that's you like dug into research. It kind of like what's going on here.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I had not really, I can't say that I was skeptical. I hadn't really thought about the afterlife. Maybe when I was younger, like a teen or something like that, and you think about astrology and all that kind of stuff. But then I sort of went down my path of career and having a family, and I was just sort of living my life. And I think if people had said what to me before I understood what happens after you die, I think I would have thought, I don't know, but I don't think you go anywhere. And it's horrible. Like you don't see your family anymore. And so I was devastated at the few people who died in my life before my mother-in-law. I was devastated. I was like devastated. And then after she died and she sort of showed me, hey, I'm still here. I was like, okay, what? Like, okay.
Well, let's go there. Hey, if you're enjoying the video, just a quick note and reminder, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. That's what I think people are dying to know because everyone, and I always say that dying to know, which is so, apropos, dying. So share a little bit about your relationship with her before her death, and then she dies and she comes through. Just take us. Just
Well,
take us.
yeah, and that actually makes me think of another thing that after I put my book out, which was like years after she died, and now I'm understanding everything. So I put my book out. My friend said, after she read my book, my friend said, "Geez, you must have been so close to your mother-in-law." And we were close, very loving, small family. But I don't know that we were that much more close than anybody else, you know? And then she said, "Well, your mother-in-law must have been so strong." And I was like, if she was strong, but I don't know that she was that much more strong. So she said, "Well, why did she come through to you?" And I was like, "I don't know." And then my girlfriend thought about it and she came back and she said, "Oh, I know why. Because she knew you would like research it, put a pen to paper and help get the word out there." And so our relationship was close enough. I'm from a very small, close family, geographically and emotionally. So, we were close. Um, but I was certainly not in terrible grief when she died. Initially, the first couple of days, but after, weeks or months, I was accustomed to it a little bit. I wasn't in horrible, horrible grief. I wasn't clouded by grief, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But so I think what she did is she was like, I've got to get through to this. To Annette. Obviously, we had a soul contract together on the other side, but I didn't know that. I fell in love with her son. I was married to her husband. My husband's her son. But at any rate, once she got through to me, it was very, like I am, very methodical. How she planted breadcrumbs along the way. She enlisted spirit guides of mine. She enlisted other deceased family members. I started getting more dreams during that time, because I think the other side knew, all right, for us to get through to Annette, we can't just bombard her. We have to take this a step at a time and do it on her pace, because that's how I am even in work. I need to absorb and digest before I go to the next thing, And then once I had an overall understanding, then I was able to sort of, oh, I get it, and put it together. But what happened, the big question I had when I was researching all things metaphysical, because once you get involved in metaphysical, there's so much out there, so much. And you can look at it from so many different angles. So the one thing I wanted to know is, if we go on, what are we doing here? What is this? That's what I was like, I need to, I don't want to get through my life and have blown something, like, oh, totally missed the boat because it's supposed to be something else, So I was like, that was my question. If we go on, what are we doing here? And in that 4 years, I read hundreds of books, hundreds of articles, talked to hundreds of people, because once you start talking to people, I would say like 65% of the people you speak to, 70% were like, "Oh yeah, I see my mother in my dreams all the time," or "My son says this to me." Like everybody's got these stories. Nobody talks about them. Everybody's just living their life, and people don't talk about them. That's why a show like yours is great. The more people out there that understand that it's not about this, that there's a bigger, broader picture here, the better off we all are. But people don't talk about it. And I took classes, I took metaphysical classes, spiritual classes, how to make how do you levitate, telepathy, all kinds of automatic writing, how to meditate, all kinds of classes, because I just wanted to understand what we're supposed to be doing here, which is why my book is Your Soul Focus, because at the end of that 4 years, I was able to focus my soul. And then I was able to say, let me consolidate this, because my skill set is taking very elusive topics and making them relatable to others. I mean, in my profession, in my job, I manage the physician compensation and contracting department. So I know physician compensation, fair market value. It's a very elusive, nuanced topic, and I'm able to summarize it so people can get in there and grow their careers. So so that's what my focus was. it was like, I need to understand. And so what it did for me is now, as I live my life, one thing that's very different is I can see I can tell when the universe is activating me. I know that. I can't
Mhm.
hear the other side. Still don't have that spiritual bent. It's just I'm very left brain analytical dominant,
Mhm.
but I am in tune to the universe so that when something happens, I'm just like, oh, that's a nod from the universe, or oh, you're supposed to do this. I sort of see that now,
Mhm.
you know.
So
Yeah.
interesting. So hence why she chose you, because you would be the perfect
Mhm.
messenger for so many people to say, okay, let me take this seriously. And she's distilled it down so that we can comprehend it in a fashion that works for so many people. So I want to spend, if it's okay with you, the bulk of this, because I know people are like, well, why are we? And am I on the right track and all of that? But can you just give a little bit of time to mother-in-law comes through? I just heard you say dreams. How else did she start to come through?
Well, actually, she didn't come through in my dreams, and how she initially came through was through my daughter. So I call it the Pom Pom Story because my mother-in-law died October 14, 2006. We buried her October 19. About a half a week after that, my daughter and I are having breakfast, maybe on a Wednesday. She's getting ready for school. I'm getting ready for work. She's 13. And she says in a very matter-of-fact way, and we're not a family that talks about spirituality or death or anything like that. We were all very distraught. My mother-in-law was gone. And she said to me, Grandma Lucille gave me a gift yesterday. Lucille's my mother-in-law's name, gave me a gift yesterday. And I was like, really? Hmm. And so she said, yeah, she gave me pom-poms. I'm like, how? And she said, well, we were in art class. And she tells me the story very innocently. She said, we're in art class and we were making 3D cards. And I decided to make a card with 11 green and 11 red pom-poms. So I went to the art supply closet, took out the Tupperware of pom-poms, all different colors and sizes, took out my 11 green, my 11 red. I counted them 3 times, which my daughter still is that meticulous. You know, she'll count it. So very, very much like her. She said, I put the top back on. I brought it back to the closet. And when I came back, there was my 11 green, my 11 red, and one lilac and one white. And I said, well, had those 2 get there? And she said, and I could see she had played through every possibility in her head. So she was like, I know. I don't know if they floated through the air. I don't know if they just appeared out of nowhere. And I said, well, were there other people around your desk? I went through all the traditional 2D possibilities. And she was like, no other people there. The desk was all to myself. There's only 11 kids in the class, whatever. So and she said to me, and they're the same color as the balloons we let go at Grandma's graveside. So I know she's saying she got the balloons. So she goes, do you want to see the pom-poms? And I'm like, yes. And so she runs upstairs and comes down with 2 pom-poms. And they weren't even like purple and white. They were like light purple and like pearl colored, like literally the colors of the balloons we let go. It wasn't even like off color. And I was like, and I didn't know what to make of it. So I said like a foolish thing for a mother to say, but I didn't know what to make of it. So I said, well, all I could say is this. If those are really from Grandma Lucille, then when you die, you should be buried with them in your coffin because that would be like a miracle. And so she was like so excited and proud, and she ran up and put them away, whatever. And so that was the first thing. And so I assumed with my little pea brain that he was going through some coping mechanism,
Mhm.
some deep grief
Yeah,
coping mechanism. And obviously somehow she put them there and didn't remember or whatever.
sure.
So that and I, as her mother, I wanted to figure out how I helped. Do I take it to a specialist? Like how do we deal with this? So I started talking to people about the Pom Pom Story. And one of the people I spoke to about it was my good friend Maria. In the book, I changed names, so she's Donna, but her name was Maria. And it was like maybe a week after that, I tell her the Pom Pom Story. She I had been friends with her for about 10 years. I'm still friends with her. She waits for my whole story, and then she looks at me and until I finish, and she goes, "You believe in the afterlife, don't you?" Now, here's a credible adult friend. And that's the subtitle of my book. You believe me? Because that actually added to my daughter's story was like, and I looked at her and I was like, you believe in the afterlife? And she was like, of course, Annette, which I would say now. I understand it now. But at that point, So and then she proceeded to tell me that she frequents, when she needs, this particular medium out in Setauket, Long Island, Josephine Girangelli, another
Mhm.
city. She's out on Long Island, and my friend Maria, taps into her deceased father for real life questions, like,
Mhm.
should we sell the house? And I'm thinking of naming my son X, and what do you think about that name? Like, conversation with her deceased father, and I'm like, in shock. Maybe about a week or two after that, I go out with my recently widowed father-in-law, my husband, and my son. We go into town. We live in Farmingdale. We go into town. We're sitting at a restaurant, and we're near a window that's facing the street. And there's a big poster on the window facing out, but I can see the back of the poster. I can see through it. And it says, "Dinner and Show with Josephine G." The same medium my friend just told me about. So I'm like, so here's the breadcrumbs.
Yes.
And I like to say, and Josephine plays a part in my book, because I like to say my mother-in-law chose her from the other side to help open my
Mhm.
eyes, really. So I was like, I called my girlfriend when I get home. I'm like, you want to go to this thing? It's in 4 months. And she said, absolutely. I can't believe she's going to be in our town. And blah, 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 blah. So I call up. It was 3 friends. So I said, Annette, party of 3, make the reservations. And in that 4 months, I'm telling people the Pom Pom story. And what I'm finding is that, whereas I'm thinking it's a grief and a coping mechanism, people have things. Oh yeah, I found this, and I'm like, I mean, I spoke with a professional, one of my co-professional consultants, and he actually said to me, "I never told anybody." There's a lot of that, in
Yes.
in corporate America. There's a lot of, I never told anybody this because people don't talk about it. And he said, I was going into the hospital to visit my mother, who was sick at the time and made it through. My wife and I drove up to the hospital, and clear as a bell, my deceased father walked in front of the car. I saw him and my wife saw him. Both people saw this, and then they go visit the mother. And I'm sitting here looking at him like, "Uh, really? Like, what? He's like a professional insurance consultant. Like, what? Healthcare consultant. So in that 4 months, I'm hearing more and more and more stories, and people are not as incredulous about it as I was. And now I'm starting to think, maybe these really were pom poms from the like, I don't even. Oh, okay. So
Mhm.
so we go to the dinner and show, we check in, and I'm viewing it like a magic show, but it's what you typically see nowadays. It's a little bit more out. People see it on TV and all the time, things like that, and different, shows and clips. But basically, it was like that kind of a setting. It was in a restaurant. There were maybe 150 people, 100 people. We'll all have dinner first, and then Josephine comes out and she reads somebody over there and a table over there, and they're crying, and it's a police officer, and I figured they're planted, or she knows them or whatever. And then she comes right over to our table, and she says, I have a woman here with very dark hair. My mother-in-law had black hair, and she's saying that her name is Lucille, which was my mother-in-law's name. And so I'm thinking, my girlfriend, did she call and tell her, like, what? And then she said, is it maybe Lou? Is there something with an L here? And she's holding her stomach. She died. My mother-in-law died of pancreatic cancer, which is a horrible disease. Maybe a stomach cancer, or like a stomach. And I would not take the microphone. I was just like, my mind was racing. Like, this is like, who ratted me out? I mean, I made reservations. We didn't pay until we got there. They, like, who Googled me? Like, and how could they even connect this? Like, the whole thing was, and my girlfriend is livid, pissed at me, kicking me under the table. And I was too afraid to, I'm more brave about it now, but at the time I was too afraid to take the microphone. And so Josephine, then the woman behind me at the table next to me, raised her hand and said, I have an L in my name. My name's Elizabeth. And she said, all right. So she went to over there and she said, I see that you booked a trip to Italy. And Elizabeth, like, oh, I just came back from Florida. I had booked a trip to Italy. So she started telling my mother-in-law. And I'm like, anyway, she retreats over there. She reads somebody else. And this is where I have to give my mother-in-law credit. She comes back. Josephine comes back. And she's like, this woman's still here. And like, I think about now, I understand the calisthenics and the energy necessary to
Mhm.
accomplish one reading, let alone I'm coming back at her.
Yeah.
So I mean, I am so grateful to my mother-in-law for being so insistent and persistent and expending the energy. She did come back. She came back. And this time I was like, all right, I took the microphone. And then the one thing that there was one line where I say, I went from maybe not, maybe to, okay, I'm done. I believe this. Like now I got to figure out what's going on. Was my mother and mother-in-law were both diagnosed with cancer within days of each other a year before. My mother breast, my mother-in-law pancreatic. My family and small close family got crash course in all things cancer. I mean, treatments, surgeries, chemo, radiation, everything. My mother made it through. She actually died in 2022, so she lived another 15 years. My mother-in-law succumbed to the cancer after 1 year. So from 2005 to 2006, for that 12 months in there, they were both treatments, and we're taking them everywhere. It was a horrible, horrible year. And every time we would visit one or the other, they would always ask how the other one was. My mother would say, how's Lucille doing? My mother-in-law would say, how's Rita doing? That's my mother's name. And so every single time, and I'm sitting there in this restaurant, and she says, Josephine with the microphone, she said, oh, this woman is asking, how's Rita doing? She's still here, isn't she? Now, Rita's my mother's name, not a common name. And I was like, and I know my mother-in-law took all her energy to say that, because that was it for me. Like, it wasn't, well, maybe this, and maybe now my accounting brain was like, statistically, it is more difficult to fight this than to
Yeah.
believe that my mother-in-law was really talking to her. So
Mhm.
that line was like, I'm done. Now it's not a matter, like, it's like she handed me the reins, and I
Mhm.
was like, that's it. Now I've got to figure out, is this really true? And if so, what the heck is going on? And that started my path. That was April 27th or 29th, 2007. So she died October 2006. It was the last Sunday in April. That's the Sunday of this show. And at that point, I consider my mother-in-law handing me the reins and saying, go run with this, Annette. You know?
Yeah.
And I did. So, yeah.
Well, I'm jumping in because I'm like, I love that. And I love it. And Kristin's going to feel the same way. I love it because there are so many people who, like you, are like, there's no way this is true. There's no way this is true. There's no way this is true. And your story and the strength of your conviction that it wasn't true is such a great way to open this up for somebody who is sitting there going, okay, maybe, maybe she is true, but again, they're probably saying she's planted. They brought somebody in.
Yeah, the skepticism is so large and in charge. And there's so many people. I mean, by the time I had the courage to have this show, because it wasn't originally like this, then I would talk to people. They'd say, so, what's the podcast about? And I'd be like, well, and then people that I would think would never believe this stuff, they'd go, come here, come here.
Yeah.
I've never told anyone, but I think there was a ghost in our house. And they would tell me this story. And I'm like, yeah. And
Come on the
all
show.
harboring these stories that you're like, I don't know where to fit this or how to explain this. But what's so unique about you is you're like, research needs to be done, and I'm going to devote some serious time to getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I spent all my discretionary time really for 4 years on the afterlife. I spent thousands because I just needed to understand it. And I just, that's what I did for 4 years. I was like, and what I found is when I started reading books and listening to people and listening to, webinars and seminars and interviews and people speak, is that there were, I'm going to say, hundreds of people, hundreds of books that made no sense to me. They just didn't resonate with me. They were just crazy. It was like, not that it was crazy, but I couldn't get through it. Like I kept saying, my brain is not getting what they're putting down. My brain was not it just didn't make sense. It didn't, and then there'd be one book or somebody that I was like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes, and so I would, after 4 years, I was basically able to pull the things that made sense to me and
Yes.
summarize them, because there's so much out there. And a
There's
lot of it's very uplifting, but it's
Mhm.
not concrete enough to
so
relate
abstract.
it to relate it to yourself, you know?
So, with being able to summarize and coalesce and say, this I can connect with, this is palatable to people who don't live in this abstract, esoteric world. What are some of the high level things that in those 4 years of research you really are bringing through in your message from your mother and, excuse me, your mother in law and from your book?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it was my mother-in-law and a lot of my deceased relatives at that point, because she brought them all in, and spirit guides, which at the beginning of this, I did not want to have to believe in spirit guides or reincarnation. I was like, really, I have to believe in that now? But now I understand it. So,
Yeah.
but the first thing is, there's a lot of things that I summarized. The points of my book is about 25 or 30 like real practical takeaways, and the first one is that it's not about this side. This side is very important,
Mhm.
but it's a sliver
Mhm.
of our whole soul.
Yeah.
And so when we leave it, it is sad because we'll never have this exact circumstance again.
Mhm.
But it's one tiny little piece. It's really about the other side. It's more important to our soul and to the souls of our deceased loved ones that we accomplish our purpose here, then and get back to the other side and have accomplished our purpose, then we don't. And souls are very, I like to say, polite. They're not going to stand in our path. They'll nudge if it's appropriate.
Mhm.
They'll be blatant if it's appropriate, but they're not going to interfere with our
Mhm.
growth, our soul's growth, or the growth of anybody else. So another very practical thing that I learned is that if you want to believe that your deceased loved one is here, ask for something specific. Ask for something specific. For the most part, they're going to show it to you within about 10 days, 10, 14 days. They are going to show it. If
Mhm.
they don't show it, because some people say, oh, I didn't see it. It may be coming to you in a way you didn't plan on, or didn't envision, but they are trying to get it to you. And the only time that they really won't, really the only time they won't is, number one, if they can't for some reason, because maybe they're struggling on the other side and they still haven't figured out exactly how to communicate exactly what you want, or showing you is going to interfere with your path, your growth,
Mhm.
Right. I
or
think that's
the path of someone else.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's so important. I want to share really quickly. I was worried about someone and I connected with my father and I said, should I be worried? If I should be worried, show me a skull and crossbones. So a few days go by and I'm watching something like on, I think it was HBO, and I just chose this really random thing that I normally wouldn't choose. And I'm just watching it. And it was like a documentary. And suddenly this guy is sitting on a couch and he grabs a blanket and wraps himself in it. And the blanket is covered in skull and crossbones.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
Mhm.
Right. You have to be in
This
tune
is,
to it.
yeah.
And it's going to come to you when you don't expect it. And so it's
Mhm.
not immediate, but really it is within 10 days or 2 weeks. And there is the out, because they're not going to interfere with your path if
Mhm.
it's more important, because it's in the beginning when I was experimenting with this, I was asking all the time. I was asking for specific things, specific days, and I was getting them. But at some point, they don't want you preoccupied
Right.
with
Right.
them. You got to get what you need done here.
Mhm.
And another important thing is everybody comes here with basically having selected three main things. Number one, you select how you're going to be raised, sort of your family, your parents, your upbringing kind of thing. You also select your purpose here. What's your purpose here? And this is important. Everybody likes to think their purpose is something very grand, because we're all exposed to media and we see superstars and they're doing big things and they influence lots of people. And we all think, wow, they're so important. So a purpose has to be, the purpose can be very small, and it can have nothing to do with you or your family. It could be, yeah, let me just get to the third thing. Third thing is how you're going to head back. Those are the things. And you're born with a dunce cap on intentionally by design, because if you really knew, you were like, oh, my husband's going to die of a car crash at 55 years old, from like 50 to 60, he'd be locked in the house. You wouldn't, you can't be preoccupied. Your soul, you got to get your job here done. So here's an example of it, have your role having to do with somebody not having to do with you. So maybe in one, again, I didn't want to have to believe in reincarnation. I now understand it's true. In one life, let's say that you are in a car crash and you're dying on the side of the road, and a good Samaritan stops by, and you actually die in this woman's arms, and she's just consoling you as you depart to the other side. Horrible thing. She's a total stranger, whatever. You may come back the next life with her, where she's now a patient and you're a hospice nurse. And your whole purpose is to be a hospice nurse while she crosses over. And here you are, you're living your life, you live till 80, you have a family, and you're thinking, my purpose must have to do with me and my family. But your purpose could be that. It could be to help someone who helped you in a past life who is not related to you. So purpose isn't always a grand thing. It can be a small thing. And a key to helping people understand their purpose is if you, because another big reason people come here is to learn how to deal with things like addictions and things like that. It's like to get away from things, so conquer things.
Right.
And so if you are in tune to things that consistently irritate you about what you do or about what other people do, that may be a hint at something that you're trying to conquer here. Not everybody who you meet is here to be your soulmate who makes you like happy. A lot of times soulmates cause a tension or a friction because it's really more about growth than it is about just coalescing, or being so happy. That's not the right word. Maybe it is, with, cohabitating with somebody and being so great like that. So at any rate, that's, and the other thing is, if all else fails, if you're moving forward in love and kindness, you're on your path. That's love and kindness, because our whole purpose here is to love and grow. That's it.
Yeah. Raising the consciousness, bringing it up. Yep. So
you're, if you're like, well, I'm struggling, I don't know, just that's it. The other big thing for people to be like conscious of is, especially when they're in a time of need, they are never alone. You're never alone. There's a cast of characters around you all the time. You're not disturbing them. They're not like resting in peace. They're resting in peace, but it's not like, you're disturbing them by calling on them. If you need something, you need help, talk to them. They hear us the way we hear each other. The problem is we don't hear them, but they hear us, and they will help us. And they're always there for you, whether it's spirit guides or deceased loved ones or guardian angels. So in times of desperation, just know that you're never alone. And so that's really important. And I like to sort of tell people to visualize it. I visualize like a snow globe. So you basically like walk out of your house. It's a beautiful morning. It just snowed. There's snow as far as the eye can see, snow on the trees. It's all white and gorgeous. No one stepped in the snow yet. And just outside the end of where your eyes can see, picture you're really in an acrylic dome, and your loved one just there on the other side. They see this whole same thing, So picture it like a snow globe, like we're in a snow globe, and they see us and they're here with us. But, unfortunately, we can't hear them in the same way that we used to. But that's something else that I walked away with that made me like just so much more confident about things, just to know you're not alone,
Yes. Yes. I
and then
love
people say you're not alone. Well, then they see me, when I'm going to the bathroom. They don't really care about that. You know what I mean? They tune into emotions, not physical things. They're not earth people anymore. So they're tuning into your emotions. If you are eating something that you absolutely enjoy, like, oh my God, I love this chocolate cake, they feel your emotion. But they are, it's the emotion that they love. that they experience, not the, you know, the physical end of things. So
Mhm.
those are some of the things that I walked away with that I was like, well, that's interesting, you know. And another thing I tell people, this is another analogy I have that help people understand, excuse me, what I had learned. Because everybody can relate to this. If you see, let's say, you see or you have like a 3 or a 5-year-old child, and the child wants candy bar for breakfast, and you're like, you know, I can't give you a candy bar for breakfast, but you know, whatever. And the kid's screaming a total tantrum, whether it's a toy or a candy bar, or whatever. Everyone's seen a 3 or a 5-year-old meltdown, or you've had it in your own house. So they're melting down, and you basically are trying to reason with them and they're not getting it. It's like, well, I'll give you a candy bar later. And it's like they're not getting it. I don't have candy bars in the house. We have to go out and get them. And they're just totally melting down. And you as an adult have a different perspective. Your perspective is, you know, I have empathy for what you're going through, but you know, this candy bar means nothing. This, you can have hundreds of candy bars in your whole life. You might even get one this afternoon if I get out to the store and get you one. And at the end of the day, you're going to grow up, you're going to have a job, you're going to contribute to society, you're going to fall in and out of love. You might have kids of your own. The candy bar is meaningless. Yet you look at the child, it's so meaningful to them and they're devastated.
Yeah.
That's how the other side views us when we're devastated about losing them.
Mhm.
We're desperate for them and we're crying and we're distraught, but they understand that what we have going on here is a blip.
Mhm.
Their perspective is more broad.
Right.
So the way our perspective is more broad than a 5-year-old, their perspective is more broad than ours. And so they feel empathy for what we're going through. They wish we wouldn't go through it. And they're probably trying to reason with us on the other side. But when we're in that deep kind of despair, but they understand, you know, something, we're going to be together soon. Like this is a blip. Don't worry about this. And
Yeah.
that's how they look at us, you know.
Well, and it is about understanding how you can communicate with them. And learning. I love the you know, when you're talking about the signs and picking out a sign, because you're right, people don't always. I was telling a story just recently about somebody who was seeing ladybugs from her mom, but it was a certain kind, and you know, and she felt like her mom wasn't there. Yet the table next to her at dinner was a birthday, and they had ladybugs on their wrapping paper.
Yeah.
You know, so it's sometimes people, you know, they think that it's only a sign if it's exactly, you know, if the cardinal comes and sits on their windowsill, that's means that they got a sign. But if they see a cardinal, and you know, so that is a really good thing for people that are trying to just even start the baby steps of believing that spirit is around them and loved ones are around them.
Yeah, I tell people that too, that, you know, if you say, well, give me, so now I'm going to ask for a specific sign. I want the newspaper to come with page 12 printed upside down. You know, if you make that specific, it might work. Okay. But, and then like after 7 days, you get the newspaper and you know something, there's a page upside down, but it's page 10. So you're like, I didn't get it. It's like, could you imagine the calisthenics you're
I know.
on the inside to try and get it? You know?
Yeah.
It's a lot for them. You know, so it's a lot for them to manipulate the energy that we're
It's,
living
and
in.
that's the other point. I think, I know, Kristin, you have a question to ask, but I wanted to go back and talk about the energy, because it is, you know, I am connected with spirit and it is an energy exchange and it's not perfect. And so it is learning that this energy, and that we can feel them if we can quiet that, you know, our guides or them, you know, you can feel, you know, feel little chills, or sometimes people will feel a little, you know, somebody touching them on their shoulder. So there is, but it's the energy is what this is all part of. So I like
And you
that.
can actually develop a language if you wanted to.
Yes.
Like I will say with my mother now, because my mother and father are on the other side. So I ask them for specific things and they give them to me at different times. So my mother, I've asked for a peacock, and my father for a swan, white swan, and they'll give them to me at different times. So I know they're, hey, you're thinking about me, you know. So you develop that kind of almost like a language with them. all right, it's not the same as when, I used to be able to sit and talk and hold them and have a conversation, but it's nice to know they're still there,
Right, right. Well, what I love is how common sense and practical, you're just really bringing it down to earth and making it very accessible for people to say, okay, let me play with this. Let me see what I can do, because it is about recognizing that the relationship isn't over. And as much as conceptually we can go, I get it, like in a grander, much more expansive cosmos and consciousness, this is but a blip of time, and yet the grief feels really real. Well, let me see about forging that connection. But I wanted to share really quickly, just once again, just a bit of a personal story. As of late, last few months, I've just been grappling with some things about career and finances, and feeling really frustrated, and asked for some signs. And I feel like it can come through people as well as symbols.
Sure.
And so last week, my husband just randomly, and he's very, very sweet, but he came in and he had his earbuds in and he pulled them out and he said, "I'm listening to James Taylor. Um, what is that? Shower the people you love with love."
Yes.
Right? And he goes, "I just want to tell you, this song is you. It reminds me so much
Oh,
of you," which
oh,
was the sweetest gift. I mean, I just like started tearing up. And then yesterday, I get, my son is in high school, and, I can go to the website and I get alerts on my email, like he submitted this assignment. And I usually just check to make sure, where are his grades? Is he, just want to get an overall bird's eye view. And I clicked on it and the assignment comes up, and it was one question about someone in the book. Who does it remind you of? And he said, the woman in the book um, shows a lot of love and compassion, and she reminds me of my mom who
oh,
does that for
God,
me.
that's so great.
And I just was
Ah,
like, because my son is not effusive. He is not like, "Mom, I just love you so much." I'll say, "Love you, Mom." He goes, "Love you." Like,
yeah.
that's just his personality. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm not gonna tell him I saw it, because that is not the point of it." It was just like, and then before this podcast, I was just sitting and I connected with my dad and I got quiet and just saying, "Do you have a message for me in all of this?" And what I felt was, keep it simple.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like simple, like, I get, "Oh, if this doesn't happen with this happened, I'm thinking about this," and it's like, remember what matters.
Yes. And
Remember what
your
matters.
son chose you. I always tell mothers that, or fathers, anybody, because people lose sight of that. And I didn't know. I wish I had known that earlier in my kid's life, But
Mhm.
but they choose their parents. They choose their upbringing. So I remember once I did understand it, I had my son at one point say to me, "I wish I had Justin's mother because he whatever, blah, 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 blah." And I was like, "Hey, you chose me." So
Yeah, yeah, and just remembering, and the reason I share this story too is because both you and Bernadette said it's all about love. Just remember that it's about love. So I was getting so caught up in the what ifs and if this and how is that, and right? No, this is what it's about.
yeah.
Don't lose
I
sight.
I I had a great this past weekend. I volunteer. I'm on the board for a foundation called Forever Family Foundation, and
Mm.
it's a great foundation, and we host grief retreats that help people in grief. And so
Mhm.
I do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff because I don't have any psychic ability, but we bring together mediums and psychologists, and we spend the whole weekend with people in grief. And so this past weekend was one of our retreats, and I was registering people as they come in, and there's a whole list, and the list was printed out by one of my co-volunteers, and she prints them in alphabetical order by first name. And right at the beginning, I see there's a person with my first name, and it's not a common name, but I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to keep an eye out when she comes to check in, just to say hello, it's my name. But what hit me right away was right above her name was I don't want to say the person's whole name, but was this, somebody else's name, and the last name of that person was Gennaro. So my maiden name was Annette Gennaro. I was Annette Gennaro for 30 years. So when I saw Annette right under Gennaro, I was like, oh my God, that's like, and in my mind, that's a nod from the other side
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
saying, thank you
You're
for
where you need to
doing
be.
the help this
Mhm.
weekend, thank you for helping these people
Yeah.
and for being there, and it helps me. I love it. So I was
Yeah,
like,
I've been thinking about your name because my great aunt is Annette, and so I have felt this whole time that this was a nod from her when I saw
right.
that. Yeah.
There's not that common a name, and
It
so,
isn't.
right,
It
when
isn't.
Yeah, that's so funny too because right before this podcast, there's a doctor I've been listening to, and for some reason, like 5 minutes before this podcast, I was like, "What is her first name?" And I looked it up, Annette.
Oh, really? Oh my
See?
gosh,
Mhm.
that's so I thought
It is, yeah,
right,
so
it
just
wasn't
that
like
three.
nice from the other side,
Mhm.
I didn't ask for a sign, I was going there to just to have to help people and to, you
But
know
what you just showed the audience that's listening, that here you gave an example, and then the two of us, so there's three of us
Right,
here, and
right,
two of us had, your name is Annette, and we both had a sign from an Annette, just out of the blue. So that is just to show people how real and how much, how spirit is with us all the time. That was
well,
the other thing I really was glad that you said, is that we are never alone. And
right.
that, we have a spirit guide, we have all our loved ones, ancestors. I work with ancestors. And so that's been, and even if you didn't know them, you have special people there who are,
Yes.
sending you, like,
Mhm.
downloading things to you, trying to help you and to, guide you in whatever it is that you're seeking or working on.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely, and I know that in my 20s, I would say, and into my 30s, I certainly thought I was alone. I never would have believed that there's a cheerleading people behind me, like, helping me. I was thinking, I was, you know, not struggling, but struggling enough and getting my day-to-day life going and juggling working full time and having kids and all that.
Yep.
And it took a lot of my energy. And once my eyes were opened that there's this whole other world and they're like helping me, I just felt very relieved. I
Yes.
was like, oh, it's not all up to me.
Yes.
Like I've got help, So yeah, so that is something that I think people should walk away with.
Yeah.
Wow. Time goes by so fast.
You
This
know?
one to me felt like it went by lightning speed.
Mhm.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you about the book or your experience that if, in an hour you're like, "Oh, I should have said that," or "This feels like
No,
something I
the
should
only
have."
thing I like to sometimes end with, because I just think it's like a valuable nugget, is that if people wanted to do one thing to help elevate their themselves, I tell people, I know it's difficult to do, but try to lose the feeling you get that comes with the word compare. Because when you compare yourself, and it's not just to others, so people may say, "Oh, well, I'm not a jealous person. I'm happy with." Okay, but many people compare themselves to themselves. They say, "When I was younger,
That's
I was
right.
able to do blah, 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 blah." Or, "I was hoping by this point in my life, I'd have, wealth of this much," or something, So, it's not only comparing to others, which is sort of detrimental to anybody's spirit and soul, but comparing to your perception of you at different stages or whatever. I think if people could lose the feeling that comes with the word compare, and especially if you can replace it with love, I think we'd all be way better off.
Mhm.
Hard to do, but yeah, that's my
No,
final, my
yeah.
final.
No one's ever said that on the show, and I think that's so true. Those are some of those things that I feel like whether it's internalized or spoken, it's like a current that runs through
Yes,
our society, stealing our joy.
yes,
I
Mhm.
really appreciate you saying
yes,
that.
yes.
So
And
say oh,
go ahead.
please.
I
No,
was going
you
to say, I love that you also are connected with the Forever Family
Yeah,
Foundation. We've had mediums on the show. Just recently, we had one that is connected with them as well. So it is a wonderful organization that is wonderful
yeah.
that
Yeah,
you
it's
do
great.
that.
My mother-in-law during the 4 years, my mother, my mother-in-law, she was on the other side. My mother-in-law introduced me, and the founders, Bob and Fran. Fran is strikingly similar looking in physical appearance to my mother-in-law, and they both died pancreatic, and they both died the same age, pancreatic, 67, 68. And so I met them, and they lived a half hour north of me here on Long Island, and um, basically I met them during those 4 years and I was like, oh my God, this organization is great. And Bob and Fran are great. I would consider myself a Bob and Fran groupie. Now, Fran's on the other side, but Fran has come through to me in some dreams. So, tell me things like I'm on the right course with the retreats and things like that. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Mm. Tell us the name of your book again, and how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, so my book is Your Soul Focus, and the subtitle's You Believe in the Afterlife, Don't You? And it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I've heard from people. It's helped hundreds of people already. So that was my whole purpose with. So that's great. But I've heard from people. It's a very simple, relatable book, and I have it in audio, Kindle, and the paperback.
Nice.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Annette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was wonderful.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.